offered by Mr. Langevin of Rhode Island.
Pursuant to House Resolution 476, the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Langevin, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Rhode Island.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself as time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment funds ongoing efforts to assess the viability of using low-enriched uranium fuel in naval reactors, including those in aircraft carriers and submarines, something this Congress has supported for many years now. The United States has demonstrated strong leadership to minimize and wherever possible, all but eliminate, the use of highly enriched uranium for civilian purposes. Doing so reduces the risk of nuclear terrorism and makes clear that the accumulation of HEU is solely for nuclear weapons purposes, undercutting any nation's argument that they need it for anything else. Using low-enriched uranium, or LEU, in naval reactor fuel can bring significant national security benefits with respect to nuclear nonproliferation, lower security costs, and put naval reactor research and development at the cutting edge of nuclear science. Pursuing the development of LEU fuel offers the opportunity to achieve transformational progress on fuel technology. Additionally, unless an alternative using low-enriched uranium fuel is developed in the coming decades, the United States will have to resume production of bomb-grade uranium for the first time since 1992, ultimately undermining U.S. nonproliferation efforts. Using LEU for naval reactors is not a pipe dream. France's nuclear navy already has converted from using HEU to using LEU fuel for its vessels. We must evaluate the feasibility of a similar transition for the U.S. Navy and take into account the potential benefits to the U.S. and international security of setting a norm of using LEU instead of nuclear bomb-grade material. As America confronts the threat of nuclear terrorism and as countries continue to enrich uranium for naval purposes, the imperative to reduce the use of HEU will become increasingly important over the next several decades. As such, as I said, Congress has sought to advance these efforts in a bipartisan, bicameral way over the last several years by evaluating the potential of utilizing LEU fuel in reactors for U.S. naval aircraft carriers, submarines. And with that, I yield. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to the amendment.
Correct. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to point out that there have been multiple studies done on this. In 2014, the Department of Defense, Department of the Navy pointed out the negative impacts that low-enriched uranium would have on the capability of the Navy. Again, 2016, another report. I remind the folks here in the chamber that this report was specific about saying the negative impacts that low-enriched uranium will have on the capability of our United States Navy. In 2018, letters from both the Director of Naval Reactors, Admiral Caldwell, from the Secretary of the Navy, Richard Spencer, all stating the negative impact that low-enriched uranium would have on the capability of the Navy. We look, too, at the dollars that are being proposed to offset this. The $20 million reduction in the National Nuclear Security Administration would reduce salaries in that area by 15%. And according to NSSA, this reduction would likely require a reduction in force to achieve this staffing level. They will let people go if this money is transferred to another study, a study that's been done multiple times in the past with the same outcomes, that this would have a harmful effect on the National Nuclear Security Administration. They also say that the amendment would negate recently implemented improvements in oversight and accountability and slow down the execution of critical nuclear security and safety programs. It would also affect weapons modernization and nuclear nonproliferation efforts, the same thing that the gentleman from Rhode Island said that this bill is meant to address. It actually takes money away from the efforts that NSSA is putting forward. It also would inhibit physical and cybersecurity and environmental remediation programs. So not only has this study been done multiple times, but it would take money away from the critical elements that are being proposed that this study would actually seek to find out that, again, the conclusions have already been reached and the impact of LEU on the nation's naval capability has already been identified. So, Mr. Chairman, I would reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Rhode Island is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just say that we can't fear the future. We must invest in research and development. I want to point out that then Chair of the Naval Reactors Director, Admiral Richardson, testified before the House Armed Services Committee that with current technology, he said, I quote, the potential exists that we could develop an advanced fuel system that might increase uranium loading and make low-enriched uranium possible while still meeting the very rigorous performance requirements for naval reactors on nuclear-powered warships. I also want to mention that this House already, to address the concerns of my colleague, $20 million for the research was already included in the Energy and Water Appropriations Package that passed the House on June 19th, which also included a $15 million increase to NNSA federal salaries and expenses over FY19. So these spending levels have already been set by the House, and this amendment simply matches the authorization level with the House-passed appropriations level. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I remind the gentleman from Rhode Island that this is the National Defense Authorization Act. It is not another appropriations bill. So this is specific to the use of these dollars here for these purposes specifically. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would like to yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Virginia, Ms. Luria.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
In focusing our limited resources towards effort that will make our forces more effective, reliable, and efficient. I oppose this amendment, which would decrease the National Nuclear Security Administration budget by $20 million and allocate the money to develop low-enriched uranium fuel for submarines and aircraft carriers. Drawing on my 20-year Navy experience in the supervision and operation of naval nuclear propulsion systems, it makes little sense to divert these resources. Our high-enriched uranium reactor design has successfully powered our submarine fleet, delivering a critical leg of our nuclear deterrent, and our aircraft carriers, providing our unique sustained forward presence capability for nearly 7 decades. There is no need for this amendment. Top Navy leadership and the Secretary of Energy clearly state that low-enriched uranium design for naval nuclear propulsion would, quote, result in a reactor design that is inherently less capable, more expensive, and unlikely to support current life-of-ship submarine reactors. Meanwhile, Admiral Caldwell, director of the Navy Nuclear Propulsion Program, says that investing in LEU would negatively impact reactor endurance, reactor size, and ship costs, and that its success is not assured. I have no doubt that we could eventually develop a reactor design using LEU, but would it continue to meet our operational and strategic defense needs? No. It would make our platforms inherently less capable, less operationally available, and more expensive to operate, and in turn require more of these assets to accomplish the same objectives. If the genesis behind this amendment is to advance issues of nonproliferation, it makes little sense to draw down the budget of the very agency that is tasked with the security of nuclear weapons and nuclear fuel. I will conclude as I began. We need to commit our limited resources where they are most efficiently used to support our operational forces and our national defense. These dollars are best spent on the National Nuclear Security Administration. Thank you, and I yield the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Rhode Island is recognized.
Mr. Chair, may I inquire how much time remains on both sides?
Gentleman has 2 minutes remaining.
Very good. Then I will.
Gentleman from Virginia has 3/4 of a minute.
Good. I will urge my colleagues to support the amendment. I yield the balance of my time to the gentleman from Illinois, the House's only nuclear physicist, Mr. Foster.
The gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. I rise today as the only PhD physicist in the U.S. Congress, and during my career, I have designed and led the construction of giant particle accelerators and other nuclear equipment, led high-risk and successful R&D programs, and designed equipment using classified neutron transport codes. Because of its importance to national security and nuclear nonproliferation, I have studied at length the question of minimizing the use of high-enriched uranium in naval propulsion reactors. I received numerous individual and highly technical classified briefings, examined reactor core specification, and visited the Naval Nuclear Fuel Fabrication Facility in Virginia. And I believe that continuing the research supported by this amendment is worth pursuing for the reasons given by my colleague. Several factors must be dealt with in determining the practicability of utilizing LEU in naval propulsion reactors, including the total energy and power deliverable by the core, the volume of the reactor, and the enrichment level of the fuel, reactivity limits, and the heat transfer area required for a given power level. It is complicated, but a 2016 report by the Jason Scientific Advisory Board conclusion that using an existing that an optimized LEU design instead of the existing HEU design could result in a significantly more compact core. This would be a true operational advantage and one that we should not give up by abandoning this R&D program that's been going on for years. I would just close by pointing out that I'm not alone in this. This is not only about optimizing submarine performance. As pointed out by 35 Nobel Prize winning scientists, it is crucial for nonproliferation that we set a good example for the rest of the world and not use weapons-grade uranium for applications where it is not required. Other countries, like France and others, do not use weapons-grade uranium in their submarines and carriers. We should set an example and do likewise. This R&D program will enable that possibility by continuing it for the next decade. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment.
Gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, in conclusion, I want to point to the 2016 report that assessed the additional refuelings would increase Navy fleet operating costs by several $billions a year. Folks, as we are looking to rebuild the Navy, that means ships that will not get built. That will mean less operating capability. That will mean ships that need to be at dock for longer periods of time for maintenance and for refueling. A larger submarine reactor core, which is what DoD says would be needed for LEU, requires a larger submarine, and it makes those submarines less capable and less efficient. It also requires massive redesigns, so it interrupts existing submarine construction programs. All of those things have significant impacts on the capability of the Navy. Take the Virginia-class submarine reactor, which operates on a 33-year ship expectability. That would cut that by a third, which means it would have to come back and be refueled again. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that, I yield.
The question is on the amendment offered from the gentleman from Rhode Island. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
Does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to House Res. 476, I offer amendments on block number